Daniel Harper's weathered hands moved methodically through the garden soil, pulling weeds from around his wife's favorite roses. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the modest backyard, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Every so often, he'd glance up at the kitchen window where Emily sat at the table, her dark hair falling forward as she bent over her notebook. His Mary had always loved watching Emily write. "That girl has stories in her soul," she'd say, beaming with pride. Now, 3 years after Mary's passing, those words echoed in Daniel's mind as clearly as if she'd just spoken them. Wiping his brow with his sleeve, Daniel gathered his gardening tools and headed inside. The screen door creaked softly as he entered, but Emily remained absorbed in her writing, her pen moving steadily across the page. Her face held that same intense expression Mary used to wear when she was deep in thought. "Working hard there, sweetheart?" Daniel asked, washing his hands at the kitchen sink. Emily looked up, her eyes bright with purpose. "I'm writing about Mom," she said softly. "About the time she taught me to make her sugar cookies, and how she'd always save the broken ones for us to share while they were still warm." Daniel's throat tightened. He dried his hands and pulled out the chair beside her. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the notebook. Emily nodded, sliding it toward him. Daniel adjusted his reading glasses and began to read. The words flowed across the page like a gentle stream, carrying memories so vivid he could almost smell the vanilla extract and hear Mary's laugh. Emily had captured not just the events, but the feeling of those precious moments, the way Mary would hum while she worked, how she'd dust flour on Emily's nose just to hear her giggle. "Your mother would be so proud of this," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. He cleared his throat and continued reading, taking in every carefully chosen word. The essay wasn't just about cookies. It was about love, about tradition, about the invisible threads that kept them connected even after Mary was gone. When he finished, Daniel sat back in his chair, removed his glasses, and wiped his eyes. "This is beautiful, Emily. Really beautiful." Emily twisted a strand of hair around her finger, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. Do you think it's good enough for the school competition?" "Good enough?" Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Honey, this is exactly what they're looking for. It's honest and real and comes straight from your heart." A small smile tugged at Emily's lips. "Mrs. Anderson said they want personal essays that show who we really are. But sometimes I worry that writing about Mom Island, I don't know." "Too personal?" "There's no such thing as too personal when it comes to truth," Daniel said firmly. "Your mother always said that the most powerful stories are the ones that make people feel something real." The following week, Emily read her essay aloud in Mrs. Anderson's English class. Daniel had helped her type it up the night before, making sure every word was perfect. When she finished reading, there was a moment of complete silence before Mrs. Anderson spoke. "Emily, that was extraordinary," she said, her voice warm with approval. "You've captured something truly special here." Emily's cheeks flushed pink with pleasure as she returned to her seat, and for a few days, everything seemed perfect. But then came the summons to Principal Stevens's office. Emily sat rigid in the hard plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Principal Stevens's face was stern as he placed a printed page on his desk. "Would you care to explain this, Miss Harper?" he asked, sliding the paper toward her. Emily leaned forward, confusion clouding her features. "I don't understand. That looks like my essay, but this version was found online," Principal Stevens cut in. "Posted several weeks ago on a writing forum. The similarity is unmistakable." "But that's impossible." Emily's voice shook. "I wrote this about my mom, about our memories together. How could someone else have written it?" The principal's expression remained unmoved. "The school board takes plagiarism very seriously, Emily. We have no choice but to begin expulsion proceedings." "Please," Emily pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "I would never cheat. I wrote every word myself. I swear." But her protests fell on deaf ears. By the time she left the principal's office, her world had crumbled around her. The worst part was calling her father at work to tell him what had happened. That evening, Daniel and Emily sat across from each other at their small kitchen table, the same table where she had written her essay, where they had shared so many meals and memories with Mary. Now it felt like another piece of their world was being torn away. Emily's shoulders shook with sobs as she struggled to speak. Daddy, I didn't do it. I didn't copy anything. Those were my memories, my words about Mom. Daniel's heart ached as he watched his daughter's pain. His grip tightened on her hand, his weathered fingers holding her smaller one steady. In that moment, he saw not just his 16-year-old daughter, but the little girl who used to climb into his lap for comfort, who would look to him to make everything right. I believe you, sweetheart, he said, his voice firm and clear. I believe every word. I believe every word. Emily lifted her tear-stained face. But what can we do? They won't listen to me. They won't even look at my original notebook. Daniel sat up straighter, something fierce and protective rising in his chest. He might not have much education, might not know all the fancy words and legal terms, but he knew right from wrong. He knew his daughter's heart. Looking directly into Emily's eyes, he made a vow that would change both their lives. If no one else will defend you, I will. The Monday morning air hung heavy with humidity as Daniel and Emily Harper walked the 3 blocks to Riverside High School. Emily clutched her empty backpack close to her chest like a shield. Her shoulders hunched forward, making her usually tall frame appear smaller, more vulnerable. Daniel walked beside her, his presence steady and protective. As they approached the red brick building, Emily's steps slowed. Dad, maybe we should come back later, when everyone's in class. Keep your head high, sweetheart, Daniel said softly. You've done nothing wrong. They climbed the worn concrete steps together. Inside, the hallways buzzed with pre-class chatter that died down as they passed. Students lined the walls, some averting their eyes while others stared openly. Daniel heard the whispers clearly enough. That's her, the one who cheated. I heard she copied the whole thing. Poor Mr. Harper, though. A tall girl with kind eyes. Sarah, Emily's friend since middle school, broke away from a group and hurried over. I know you didn't do it. This is crazy. She hugged Emily fiercely while Daniel stood guard, noting which students showed sympathy and which ones smirked. At Emily's locker, her trembling fingers fumbled with the combination lock. When it finally opened, she began emptying her books and personal items into the backpack. Daniel noticed the small photo of Mary taped inside the door, his wife's gentle smile frozen in time, and his resolve strengthened. The morning bell rang, sending students scurrying to their classrooms. The hallway emptied quickly, leaving behind an awkward silence broken only by the sound of Emily zipping her backpack closed. 2 hours later, they sat in hard plastic chairs before the school board. The meeting room, with its fluorescent lights and pale green walls, felt more like a courtroom. 7 board members peered down from their elevated platform while the district's attorney, Mr. Peterson, stood at a podium reviewing papers. The evidence is clear, Peterson announced, his voice clipped and certain. The essay in question bears striking similarities to content found online. Our zero-tolerance policy on plagiarism exists to maintain academic integrity. Daniel rose slowly from his chair. His work-roughened hands gripped the edge of the table as he addressed the board. My daughter wrote every word of that essay herself. It came from her heart, from her memories of her mother, my wife. His voice, though quiet, carried through the room with unmistakable conviction. Emily has never lied to me. Not once in her 16 years. She's not starting now. The board chairman, Dr. Matthews, adjusted his glasses. Mr. Harper, while we sympathize with your situation, the similarity between the texts is undeniable. Then let me prove it, Daniel countered. Give us a chance to show the truth in court. Emily's future shouldn't end because of a mistake you're making, Peterson interjected smoothly. The board's decision is final. Ms. Harper's expulsion will be processed today. No. Daniel's voice grew stronger. No, it's not final. I'm filing a formal challenge. I'll represent Emily myself if I have to. Murmurs rippled through the room. Peterson's practiced smile faltered. Mr. Harper, with all due respect, are you an attorney? No, sir. I'm a father. Daniel squared his shoulders. And that's qualification enough to fight for my daughter. Dr. Matthews leaned forward. You understand this will require a court hearing? Legal procedures? Evidence? Proper documentation? Yes, sir, I understand. Daniel's eyes never wavered. And I'll learn whatever I need to learn. Emily reached for her father's hand under the table, squeezing it tight. The simple gesture said everything. "Thank you. I believe in you. I'm scared, but I trust you." Later that night, their small living room became a makeshift law office. Daniel sat in his old leather recliner, surrounded by legal books borrowed from the public library. His reading glasses perched on his nose as he worked his way through understanding civil court procedures and legal rights in education. Yellow legal pads covered the coffee table, filled with his careful notes. Emily appeared with 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea, setting one beside her father. She curled up on the couch, watching him work. The table lamp cast a warm glow over his concentrated face as he underlined passages and jotted down questions. "Dad?" Emily's voice was soft. "What if we lose?" Daniel looked up from his books, meeting his daughter's worried gaze. "Then we'll know we fought for what's right." "But Emily?" He removed his glasses and leaned forward. "I believe the truth has a way of coming out. Your mother always said that." Emily's eyes grew bright with unshed tears, but for the first time since this nightmare began, they also held something else. Hope. She watched her father return to his studies, his dedication to justice as steady as his love for her. The wall clock ticked steadily onward as father and daughter sat together in the warm light, each drawing strength from the other's presence. Outside their window, the spring night deepened, but inside, determination blazed like a beacon against the darkness of false accusations and uncertain futures. Daniel turned another page, making more notes, while Emily sipped her tea and listened to the scratch of his pen. The legal terms might have been unfamiliar territory for a factory worker, but the fight for his daughter's future was the most natural thing in the world. The county courthouse loomed before them, its weathered stone steps leading up to heavy wooden doors that seemed to grow more imposing with each step. Emily Harper's hand trembled as she smoothed down her navy blue dress, the one her mother had bought her for special occasions. Daniel Harper adjusted his tie, the knot slightly crooked despite his best efforts. Inside the courtroom, the morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Emily sat rigidly beside her father at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The wooden chair creaked beneath her as she shifted nervously. Daniel reached over and gave her fingers a gentle squeeze. The gallery behind them had filled with familiar faces from their small-town teachers, neighbors, and even some of Emily's classmates who had skipped school to show support. Their whispered conversations created a low hum that fell silent when the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Henry Wallace presiding. Judge Wallace entered, his stern expression matching his reputation. His silver hair caught the sunlight as he took his seat, peering down at the assembled crowd through reading glasses perched low on his nose. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice carrying authority earned through decades on the bench. "We're here today regarding the matter of Riverside School District versus Emily Harper. Mr. Harper, I understand you're representing your daughter without counsel?" Daniel stood, his work-worn hands resting on the table. "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well. You may proceed with your opening statement." Daniel cleared his throat and walked to the center of the courtroom. His shoes, polished to a shine for the occasion, echoed against the floor. He turned to face the judge, then glanced back at Emily, drawing strength from her presence. "Your Honor," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a father who knows his daughter's heart." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. Emily lost her mother when she was 8 years old. Since then, she's poured her grief and love into her writing. That essay they claim she stole? It's about her mother, about watching her fight cancer with dignity, about learning to live without her. A soft murmur rippled through the gallery. Emily blinked back tears as her father continued. "My daughter sits here today, accused of theft. Theft of her own memories, her own pain, her own truth. Emily Harper has never needed to steal words. She's got enough of her own, born from experiences no child should have to face." Daniel's voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. "The school board wants you to believe she's dishonest. But I've watched this girl grow up holding on to her mother's values, truth, integrity, and courage. She writes because it helps her remember. She writes because it helps her heal." In the gallery, Mrs. Jensen, Emily's former Sunday school teacher, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Several heads nodded in agreement with Daniel's words. Your Honor, my daughter deserves to be heard, not silenced. She deserves to graduate with her class, to go to college, to make her mother proud. That's all I'm asking for today, justice for a girl who's already lost too much. As Daniel returned to his seat, hope flickered across Emily's face. The gallery's sympathetic expressions suggested her father's words had touched hearts. But that hope dimmed as the school board's attorney, Mr. Peterson, rose smoothly from his chair. His tailored suit and confident demeanor stood in sharp contrast to Daniel's modest appearance. Your Honor, while Mr. Harper's emotional appeal is touching, this case isn't about sentiment. It's about academic integrity. Peterson's practiced voice carried easily through the courtroom. We have evidence of plagiarism, and we have a witness. Emily's stomach dropped as Peterson called his surprise witness. Mrs. Blackwood, her English teacher from the previous year. Mrs. Blackwood took the stand, her thin face pinched with what looked like reluctance. Yes, I observed Emily's writing habits last year, she testified, adjusting her glasses. There were concerning patterns, times when her work seemed to borrow too heavily from other sources. Daniel stood quickly. Objection, he called out, remembering the word from late-night study sessions with legal books. On what grounds? Judge Wallace asked, his expression unchanged. Daniel faltered. She's talking about last year, not this essay. Overruled, the judge stated flatly. The witness's observations of past behavior are relevant. Emily's heart sank as she watched her father struggle to cross-examine Mrs. Blackwood. His questions were earnest but unfocused, and the teacher's responses only seemed to strengthen the case against them. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern, his pen scratching notes that Emily feared spelled the end of her college dreams. The morning wore on, and with each passing hour, the weight of defeat pressed heavier on Emily's shoulders. She noticed her father's hands trembling slightly as he shuffled through his notes, searching for questions he couldn't find. Just before noon, Judge Wallace cleared his throat. We'll take a brief recess, he announced, rising from the bench. But instead of leaving the courtroom, he did something extraordinary. He reached up and removed his black robe, letting it fall across his chair. A collective gasp rose from the gallery. Emily sat up straighter, her eyes wide with disbelief. I have presided over hundreds of cases in this courtroom, Judge Wallace declared, his voice carrying a new tone, less formal, more human. But today, I find I cannot continue in this capacity. The school board's attorney jumped to his feet. Your Honor, Judge Wallace held up his hand, silencing the protest. I will not preside over this case any longer. He stepped down from the bench, each footfall echoing in the stunned silence. Instead, I will stand with this man and his daughter. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Emily grabbed her father's arm, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Daniel stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as Judge Wallace approached their table. The once imposing judge now stood before them not as an authority figure, but as an ally. His next words carried through the buzzing courtroom. Sometimes, justice requires us to step down from where we stand, to stand up for what's right. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Daniel and Emily Harper sat in stunned silence. The events of the day felt surreal, like a dream that hadn't quite settled into reality. Emily's hands were still shaking as she clutched her father's worn leather briefcase, filled with documents they'd prepared so carefully. I can't believe what just happened in there, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel squeezed her shoulder, equally bewildered by the judge's dramatic declaration. Footsteps echoed behind them, and they turned to see Judge Henry Wallace approaching. He'd changed into a simple gray suit, his judicial robes nowhere in sight. His stern countenance had softened, revealing weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of both wisdom and old sorrows. Mr. Harper, Miss Emily, Henry said quietly, standing before them. I believe we should talk. He gestured toward the street. There's a diner around the corner. Would you join me for coffee? Daniel hesitated, looking at Emily. She nodded slightly, curiosity replacing some of the fear in her eyes. The bell above the door chimed as they entered Joe's Corner Diner. The familiar smell of coffee and fresh-baked pie filled the air. A few regular customers looked up briefly, then returned to their meals. The waitress, a kind-faced woman named Betty, led them to a corner booth away from other patrons. 3 coffees, please, Henry said, then glanced at Emily. Or would you prefer something else, young lady? Hot chocolate? Emily asked softly. Hot chocolate for the young lady, Henry corrected with a gentle smile. They sat in awkward silence until Betty returned with their drinks. Steam rose from the cups, creating delicate swirls in the air between them. Henry stirred his coffee slowly, gathering his thoughts. What I'm about to share, he began, his voice low and measured. I haven't spoken about in many years. He set his spoon down with deliberate care. I had a son, Thomas. He was about your age, Emily, when he was accused of something he didn't do. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his coffee untouched. Emily wrapped her hands around her hot chocolate mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. The system failed him, Henry continued, pain evident in his eyes. I was already a judge then, but I couldn't help him. I had to watch from the sidelines as an innocent boy's future was destroyed by people who cared more about their own convenience than the truth. What happened to him? Emily asked softly. Henry's fingers tightened around his cup. He never recovered from the shame of it. Left town as soon as he turned 18. We lost touch. Last I heard, he was somewhere out west. He looked directly at Daniel. In he came's fall. That's why I couldn't sit up there today and watch another young person's life be derailed by bureaucratic convenience. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. But sir, without your position as judge, please, call me Henry, he interrupted. And sometimes, Mr. Harper, we can do more good standing on the ground than sitting on high. I know every legal precedent that might help Emily's case. I know how these people think, how they operate. Betty appeared with a plate of apple pie, unrequested. On the house, she said with a warm smile, setting down 4 forks. Thank you, Betty, Henry said, then turned back to Daniel. I can't be your judge anymore, but I can be your advisor. Your guide through this legal maze they've constructed. Daniel shared a look with Emily, seeing hope rekindling in her eyes. Still, he hesitated. Why would you risk your reputation for us? Henry cut into the pie, pushing the plate toward Emily first. Because 20 years ago, I chose to protect my position instead of fighting for my son. I've regretted it every day since. He pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the table. This is my private number. The choice is yours, but I'd like to help. Emily took a small bite of pie, and for the first time that day, a hint of a smile touched her lips. Daniel studied the card for a long moment. We'd be grateful for your help. Henry. They finished their pie in companionable silence, making plans to meet the next morning. As they left the diner, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, and Emily's steps seemed lighter than they had been in days. That evening, in their small kitchen, Daniel and Emily sat at their worn oak table, the one that had been in the family since before Emily was born. Henry's business card lay between them, a simple white rectangle that somehow held the weight of their hopes. Daniel reached for Emily's hand, and she clasped it tightly. The familiar ritual of their evening prayer felt different tonight, charged with new possibility. Dear Lord, Daniel began, his voice steady and sure. Thank you for sending us help when we needed it most. Guide us on this path, and help us use this chance to find justice. He squeezed Emily's hand. And Lord, please be with Judge Wallace, with Henry, as he stands with us in this fight. Amen, Emily whispered, opening her eyes to look at the business card again. The kitchen clock ticked softly in the background, and through the window, the first stars of evening began to appear. The card remained on the table between them, no longer just a piece of paper, but a tangible symbol of the hope they'd found in an unexpected ally. The morning sun filtered through dusty windows as Daniel and Emily climbed the creaky steps to Henry Wallace's home office. The old Victorian house stood proud despite its peeling paint, much like its owner. Henry opened the door wearing a cardigan instead of his usual judicial robes, looking more grandfather than judge. Come in, Henry gestured, leading them into what seemed like a library that had exploded. Books covered every surface, legal volumes stacked in precarious towers. Yellow legal pads peeked out from between ancient-looking tomes, and manila folders spilled their contents across a massive oak desk. Sorry for the mess, Henry said, clearing space on a worn leather chair. When I retired from active duty last year, I brought half the courthouse home with me. Henry said. Daniel glanced at Emily, who was already eyeing the chaos with an organizer's determination. May I help sort these, Mr. Wallace? She asked, pointing to a stack of case files. Henry's face softened. Please call me Henry. And yes, that would be wonderful. Sometimes the best way to fight back is to start by creating order from chaos. As Emily began carefully arranging papers, Daniel settled into the chair across from Henry's desk. I don't know how to thank you for this, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Henry replied, pulling out a thick folder. This is going to be an uphill battle. But first, show me Emily's original essay and everything the school board presented. For the next hour, they combed through documents. Emily organized papers into neat piles while occasionally answering questions about her writing process. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating dust motes that danced around them like tiny stars. Wait, Henry said suddenly, holding up two papers side by side. Look at these dates. The school board claims they found this essay online 3 weeks before Emily submitted hers. He squinted at the fine print. Daniel leaned forward. But what? The metadata on their printout. It's dated after Emily turned in her work. Henry's eyes narrowed. They're lying about the timeline. Emily paused her sorting. Why would they do that? Henry pulled out another document, an old newspaper clipping that had fallen from one of the folders Emily was organizing. Because of this. Your essay didn't just talk about your mother, did it, Emily? You wrote about how she taught at the segregated school before integration. Emily nodded slowly. Mom always said we needed to remember that history, so it wouldn't repeat itself. She told me stories about teaching there, about the inequality she witnessed. The school board doesn't want those stories told, Henry said grimly. Some of those same board members were involved back then. Your essay wasn't just a tribute to your mother, it was an uncomfortable reminder of their past failures. Daniel's hands clenched. So, this isn't about plagiarism at all. They're trying to silence her. A knock at the door interrupted them. Henry's housekeeper entered, followed by Mrs. Peterson from the hardware store and Mr. Rodriguez from the local diner. Sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Peterson said, clutching her purse. But word's getting around about what's happening to Emily. We've known this girl since she was knee-high to a grasshopper. We've come to help. Mr. Rodriguez stepped forward. Emily tutored my daughter in English last summer. Wouldn't take a penny for it. That girl has more integrity in her little finger than the whole school board put together. Throughout the afternoon, more neighbors arrived. The baker brought coffee and donuts along with stories about Emily helping at the food bank. The librarian arrived with records of Emily's original writings from Creative Writing Club. Each person added another piece to the puzzle. Another testimony to Emily's character. Henry worked steadily, taking statements and building their case. The stack of evidence grew, not just defending Emily but exposing the board's true motivations. They never expected this kind of support, Henry observed as another neighbor left. They thought they could quietly push this through, avoid the attention. Instead, they've woken up the whole town. As the sun began to set, Daniel and Emily finally headed home. The street lamps flickered on one by one, casting pools of light along their path. From porches and yards, neighbors called out encouragement. We're behind you, Emily. Give 'em hell, Daniel. Don't you worry, honey. Truth will win out. Emily's steps were lighter than they'd been in days, but Daniel felt the weight of understanding settle onto his shoulders. This wasn't just about clearing his daughter's name anymore. They were challenging powerful people who had spent decades burying their mistakes. He looked at Emily, walking tall despite everything, and knew they couldn't back down. Mrs. Johnson, their elderly neighbor, was watering her roses as they passed. She turned off her hose and called out, Daniel Harper. I remember when your wife stood up to that board 20 years ago. She'd be proud to see you both fighting the good fight now. The mention of his late wife made Daniel's chest tighten. This was bigger than he'd imagined when he first stood up in that courtroom. But as he watched Emily wave to Mrs. Johnson, he saw his wife's strength shining in their daughter's eyes. The path ahead might be harder than he'd thought, but they wouldn't walk it alone. The courthouse bustled with nervous energy as people filed into the wooden benches. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Daniel sat beside Emily at the defendant's table, his weathered hands clasped tightly together. Emily wore her best blue dress, the one her mother had bought her for her last birthday before passing. Henry, now in a regular suit instead of his judicial robes, sat behind them. He leaned forward and whispered, "Remember what we practiced, Daniel. Speak from the heart, but stay focused." The new judge, an elderly woman named Judge Martinez, called the court to order. Her stern face revealed nothing as she nodded to Daniel. "Mr. Harper, you may call your first witness." Daniel stood tugging at his tie, a loaned one from Henry. "I call Mrs. Sarah Thompson." Emily's elderly neighbor walked to the witness stand, her silver hair neatly pinned back. She smoothed her floral dress as she sat down, smiling warmly at Emily. "Mrs. Thompson," Daniel began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "How long have you known my daughter Emily?" "Since she was knee-high to a grasshopper," Mrs. Thompson replied. "I've lived next door to your family for 12 years now. And in those 12 years, what kind of person have you known Emily to be?" Mrs. Thompson's eyes crinkled with affection. "That girl is honest as the day is long. When my cat went missing last summer, Emily spent 3 days searching the neighborhood. When she finally found him, she told me straight up that he'd been sleeping in the Johnsons' garage, even though she knew the Johnsons might get in trouble for accidentally trapping him in there." Several people in the gallery nodded, remembering the incident. Daniel called 4 more witnesses: Emily's Sunday school teacher, her piano instructor, the librarian who'd watched her grow up among the books, and her best friend's mother. Each testimony painted a picture of a girl who valued truth above all else. The school board's attorney, Mr. Peterson, tried to dismiss their statements as mere character witnesses, but something was changing in the courtroom. People were remembering their own experiences with Emily, whispering supportive words to each other. Finally, Daniel took a deep breath. "I call Emily Harper to the stand." Emily rose slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she walked to the witness stand. After being sworn in, she sat down, looking small but determined in the large wooden chair. "Emily," Daniel said gently, "could you tell us about the essay you wrote?" Emily's voice started soft but grew stronger. "I wrote it about Mom, about how she taught me to always tell the truth, even when it's hard. She used to say that honesty isn't just about not lying, it's about standing up for what's right." She paused, gathering courage. "The essay talked about how Mom saw injustice in our town's history and spoke up about it. She taught at the high school before she got sick, and she always told her students about the importance of facing hard truths about our past." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she continued. "I would never cheat or copy someone else's work. It would be like betraying everything Mom believed in, everything she taught me. This essay was my way of keeping her memory alive, of showing that her lessons still matter." The courtroom fell silent. Daniel noticed several people wiping their eyes, including one of the school board members. Judge Martinez herself seemed moved, though she maintained her professional composure. "Thank you, Emily," Daniel said, his own voice thick with emotion. "No further questions." Mr. Peterson stood for cross-examination, but his usual aggressive stance had softened. He asked only a few perfunctory questions about the essay's submission process before sitting down. The gallery buzzed with supportive murmurs. An elderly man in the back called out, "God bless you, child," before the judge could silence him. Emily's former teachers nodded encouragingly from their seats, and even the court reporter dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Daniel felt hope surge through him as he returned to his seat. Henry squeezed his shoulder, whispering, "Well done, both of you." But then Mr. Peterson stood again, straightening his expensive tie. "Your Honor, before we conclude, I have new evidence that must be presented to the court." He pulled out a manila envelope. "Objection, Your Honor," Daniel said quickly, just as Henry had taught him. "This is the first we're hearing of new evidence." "Your Honor, this only came to light this morning," Mr. Peterson countered smoothly. "It's directly relevant to the case." Judge Martinez considered for a moment. "I'll allow it, but be brief, Mr. Peterson." The attorney pulled several printed pages from the envelope. "This, Your Honor, is a copy of Emily Harper's essay, posted online 3 weeks before she submitted it to the school competition." He handed copies to the judge and to Daniel. The room erupted in gasps. Daniel's hands shook as he looked at the printed web page. dated clearly before Emily's submission date. The words were identical to her essay, every single one. Emily's face drained of color. "Dad," she whispered, "I don't understand. I never." Daniel stared at the evidence, his mind racing to make sense of it. The confidence that had been building all morning crumbled away. In the gallery, he could hear the shift. Supportive murmurs turning to confused whispers, some accusatory. He looked at his daughter's devastated face, then at the damning evidence in his hands. For the first time since this battle began, Daniel felt truly lost. The papers trembled in his grip as he struggled to find words, any words, to defend his daughter. But in that moment, with the weight of the courtroom's judgment pressing down on them, none came. The morning's triumph had turned to ashes in his mouth. Judge Martinez's voice seemed to come from far away as she called for order in the now chaotic courtroom. Emily sat frozen beside him, tears streaming down her face, the perfect image of a young girl watching her world fall apart. Shadows stretched across the Harpers' kitchen floor as the sun set behind the maple trees outside. The only light came from a single bulb above the dining table, where Daniel and Emily sat in heavy silence. 2 plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Emily's favorite comfort food, remained untouched, growing cold between them. Daniel watched his daughter push a potato around her plate with her fork, her eyes red and puffy from crying. The familiar creak of their old house seemed louder tonight, filling the spaces where their usual dinner conversation should have been. "I'm sorry, Dad," Emily finally whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't do this anymore." She set her fork down with trembling fingers. "Maybe we should just stop fighting." Daniel's chest tightened. The defeat in her voice felt like a physical blow. "Sweetheart, everyone thinks I'm a liar now." Emily's shoulders slumped. "Did you see Mrs. Peterson at church yesterday? She wouldn't even look at me. And today at the grocery store, I heard Mr. Wilson telling someone that where there's smoke, there's fire." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Daniel pushed his own plate aside, the food untasted. His bones felt heavy, worn down by weeks of fighting. The memory of that damning evidence, Emily's essay appearing online before her submission date, played over and over in his mind. Maybe she was right. Maybe they were fighting a losing battle. The screen door squeaked, followed by a gentle knock. Henry Wallace's tall figure appeared in the kitchen doorway, his kind face creased with concern. He'd taken to checking on them each evening since joining their cause. "I brought some of Martha's apple pie," Henry said softly, setting a covered dish on the counter. His eyes took in their untouched plates and Emily's tears. "Rough night?" Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum. "I'm giving up, Judge Wallace. They win." Her voice shook with bitterness. "I'll accept the expulsion. Maybe I can get my GED or something." "Now, Emily," Henry started, but she cut him off. "No. You saw what happened today. That essay was posted online before I even turned it in. How can we fight that?" She wrapped her arms around herself. "I heard Tommy Miller in the hallway telling everyone I must have copied it and changed the date on my paper." Daniel's shoulders sagged. The weight of the past weeks pressed down on him like a physical burden. "Henry, I don't know if I can keep asking her to face this. Maybe." He swallowed hard. "Maybe we should cut our losses." Henry pulled out a chair, the legs scratching against the floor. "Daniel Harper, that doesn't sound like the Marine I've come to know. The Marine in me knows when a battle can't be won." Daniel's voice came out harsher than he meant it to. "I thought I could protect her, fight this system. But look what it's doing to her." He gestured toward Emily, who had turned to stare out the dark kitchen window. "My job is to protect my daughter, not throw her to the wolves." Through the thin walls, they could hear Mrs. Jenkins next door on her phone. "Well, I always thought Emily was such a good girl, but you never really know these days." Emily's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "The whole town's turning against us," Daniel continued, his voice hollow. "The evidence looks bad. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a factory worker trying to." His voice broke. "I'm trying to be both parents to her, and I'm failing." Henry leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped on the table. "You listen to me, both of you. This isn't about winning or losing anymore. This is about truth, about standing up when the world tries to knock you down." But Emily was already heading for the stairs. I'm going to bed, she mumbled. Good night, Dad. Good night, Judge Wallace. Her footsteps echoed heavily up the stairs, followed by the soft click of her bedroom door. Daniel buried his face in his hands. I don't know what to do anymore, Henry. I really don't. Henry stood slowly, placing a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder. Sleep on it. Nothing looks as dark in the morning light. He moved toward the door, pausing in the frame. Remember what you told me about Emily's mother, how she never backed down from what was right? After Henry left, Daniel sat alone in the dimming kitchen. The house creaked and settled around him, reminding him of all the nights he'd spent here with Sarah, planning their daughter's future. Finally, he moved to the living room, lowering himself to his knees beside the old armchair where his wife used to read. Sarah, he whispered into the darkness, his voice breaking. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. I don't know if I can fix this for our little girl. His hands gripped the arm of the chair as tears finally came. I need help. Anyone. Please. The only answer was the distant sound of Emily crying herself to sleep upstairs, and the whisper of wind through the maple trees outside. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Daniel Harper walked toward Miller's grocery. His shoulders slumped under the weight of yesterday's defeat, and dark circles rimmed his eyes from a sleepless night. The sidewalk felt harder than usual under his worn work boots, each step a reminder of how far they still had to go, or perhaps how far they'd fallen. The bell above Miller's door chimed as Daniel pushed it open. The familiar scent of fresh bread and coffee wrapped around him, but even these simple comforts felt hollow now. He grabbed a small basket, mentally listing the essentials they needed: bread, milk, eggs, simple things, normal things, things that didn't involve courtrooms or accusations or broken dreams. Daniel Harper? A gentle voice called from behind him as he reached for a loaf of bread. He turned to find Mrs. Margaret Green, the retired school secretary, standing there in her pale blue cardigan. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and her kind eyes showed concern behind wire-rimmed glasses. Daniel managed a polite nod, though his throat felt tight. He wasn't sure he could handle any more sympathy, or worse, judgment, from anyone else in town. I've been hoping to run into you, Mrs. Green said, stepping closer. She lowered her voice, glancing around the nearly empty store. About Emily's essay. Daniel's hand tightened on the shopping basket. Mrs. Green, No, please listen. She interrupted, touching his arm gently. I remember that essay, Daniel. The original one. Emily shared it at the youth group meeting at First Baptist. Must be 2 years ago now. Daniel blinked, his heart suddenly beating faster. Mrs. Green's eyes lit up with certainty. I was helping with the youth group that summer, keeping records like I always did. Emily read her essay about her mother during sharing time. It touched my heart so much that I asked her if I could keep a copy. You have a copy? Daniel's voice cracked slightly. The handwritten original. Mrs. Green nodded, her face brightening. I filed it away with all my church documents. I'm a bit of a pack rat when it comes to paperwork. Drives my husband crazy. She chuckled softly. But I never throw away anything important. And that essay, well, it was special. Daniel set his basket down on the floor, his hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Green, are you saying? That essay was Emily's work, through and through. I'd stake my reputation on it. She straightened her shoulders, looking every bit the efficient secretary she'd been for 30 years. Someone else must have copied it from her, not the other way around. Hope flickered in Daniel's chest for the first time since yesterday's devastating revelation in court. Do you still have it? I knew you'd ask that, Mrs. Green smiled, reaching into her large purse. She pulled out a manila envelope, slightly worn at the edges. I went digging through my files last night after hearing what happened in court. Took me 3 hours, but I found it. Daniel stared at the envelope as if it might vanish like a mirage. Mrs. Green pressed it into his hands, and he could feel the weight of the papers inside, the weight of truth, of vindication. It's all there, she said softly. Emily's original handwritten pages, dated and everything. I even made notes on the day she shared it, just like I always did with youth group activities. Daniel's vision blurred with tears as he clutched the envelope. Mrs. Green, I don't know how to thank you. She patted his arm again, her eyes warm with understanding. You don't need to thank me, Daniel. Just make sure the truth comes out. Emily's a good girl, and she deserves better than what's happened to her. Daniel nodded, unable to speak for a moment. His abandoned shopping basket sat forgotten on the floor as Mrs. Green gave his arm one final squeeze before heading toward the checkout counter. "Mrs. Green?" he called after her, finding his voice again. She turned back. Would you be willing to testify about this?" "In a heartbeat," she replied without hesitation. "You just tell me when and where." Daniel barely remembered leaving the store. His feet carried him swiftly down the sidewalk, past the hardware store and the post office, past neighbors who called out greetings he didn't hear. The envelope felt warm against his chest where he'd tucked it safely in his jacket. He burst through his front door, startling Emily, who sat at the kitchen table pushing cereal around in her bowl. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Call Henry," Daniel said, already reaching for the phone on the wall. "Call him right now." Emily's spoon clattered against her bowl as she stood up. "Dad, you're scaring me." "What happened?" Daniel's fingers shook as he dialed Henry's number. While it rang, he pulled out the envelope and carefully spread its contents across the kitchen table. Emily gasped as she recognized her own handwriting. "My essay," she whispered, touching the pages with trembling fingers. "From youth group. But how?" "Mrs. Green," Daniel explained as Henry's voice came on the line. "Henry, can you come over right now? We've found something. Something big." Within 15 minutes, Henry's car pulled into their driveway. He hurried inside, his reading glasses perched on his nose, ready to examine whatever evidence they'd discovered. The three of them gathered around the kitchen table, where Emily's handwritten pages lay like precious artifacts. Henry picked up the first page, his eyes scanning quickly. "The date on this? It's from 2 years ago. Before the online post," Emily said, her voice growing stronger. "Before I even submitted it to school. And Mrs. Green is willing to testify?" Henry asked, looking up at Daniel. Daniel nodded, watching as hope rekindled in his daughter's eyes. She stood straighter, her shoulders no longer bearing the weight of false accusations. Henry spread the pages out, examining each one carefully, his expression growing more animated by the second. "This changes everything," he said, a smile breaking across his weathered face. "Everything." They gathered closer around the table, the morning sun streaming through the window, illuminating Emily's heartfelt words about her mother, words that had always been hers, and hers alone. The courthouse buzzed with tension as sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden benches. Nearly half the town had squeezed into the gallery, their whispers creating a soft hum that filled the high-ceilinged room. Daniel Harper sat at the defense table, his weathered hands steady as he arranged the precious evidence before him. Emily's original handwritten pages, carefully preserved in a clear folder. Emily perched beside him, her face pale but composed. She wore her mother's old pearl earrings and her best blue dress, hands folded tightly in her lap. Behind them, Mrs. Green sat in the front row, her silver hair neatly pinned back, clutching her old church records book like a shield. The new judge, a silver-haired woman named Judge Martinez, called the court to order. Her gavel's sharp crack silenced the murmuring crowd. "Mr. Harper, you may present your evidence." Daniel rose slowly, drawing strength from Emily's gentle touch on his arm. "Your Honor, I hold here the original handwritten essay my daughter composed 3 years ago for her church youth group." His voice, though quiet, carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. "Mrs. Margaret Green, who was present when Emily first shared this piece, has kept these records all this time." Mrs. Green approached the witness stand, her sensible shoes clicking against the polished floor. After being sworn in, she adjusted her glasses and spoke with quiet certainty. "I was there the night Emily read this essay about her mother. It touched all our hearts so deeply that I asked to keep a copy for our church archives. The date is clearly marked, 3 years ago, well before any online posting." The school board's attorney, Mr. Peterson, stood to cross-examine. "And you're certain this is the same essay?" "Word for word? I've been keeping records for 43 years, young man," Mrs. Green replied, a hint of steel in her gentle voice. "I know what I read, and I know what I saved. Every word matches." Daniel presented the handwritten pages to the judge, who examined them carefully. The school board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as she read, their faces growing increasingly troubled. Furthermore, Your Honor, Daniel continued, drawing out additional documents, we have evidence that the school board was aware of these original pages. They received copies during their initial investigation but chose to suppress them. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Judge Martinez's expression darkened as she reviewed the new evidence. Emails between board members discussing the existence of the original essay and deciding to ignore it. The board's own internal communications show they were more concerned with protecting their reputation than seeking the truth. Daniel said, his voice growing stronger. They worried that Emily's essay, which touched on historical inequalities in our school system, might stir up uncomfortable questions. From the back of the courtroom, Henry Wallace watched with quiet satisfaction. The former judge had helped Daniel prepare this moment, but now he stayed silent, letting this father's love and determination speak for itself. The school board chairman, red-faced and flustered, whispered urgently to their attorney. Mr. Peterson stood, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, while we acknowledge the existence of these earlier drafts, we maintain that these are not drafts, Judge Martinez interrupted sharply. These are the original work, dated and witnessed, which your clients deliberately concealed. Mr. Peterson, does the board wish to explain why they suppressed evidence that would have cleared this young woman's name months ago? The silence that followed was deafening. The board members looked at each other, but no one spoke. Judge Martinez removed her glasses, fixing the board with a stern gaze. In light of this evidence, I find no basis for the plagiarism charges against Emily Harper. Furthermore, I am deeply troubled by the board's conduct in this matter. She turned to Emily with a softer expression. Miss Harper, you are fully cleared of all charges. Your academic record will be restored, and you may return to school immediately. The gallery erupted in applause and cheers. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she threw her arms around her father. Daniel held her tight, his own eyes glistening. Around them, townspeople who had been divided now united in celebration. Former doubters approached to offer congratulations, and longtime supporters wiped away happy tears. Camera flashes popped as local reporters captured the moment. Daniel and Emily embracing, their faces radiant with joy and relief. Mrs. Green beamed from her seat, clutching her precious records book. The school board members filed out quietly, their shoulders slumped in defeat. Through it all, Henry Wallace remained in his back row seat, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He watched as Daniel shook hands with well-wishers, as Emily received hugs from classmates who had stood by her. The once divided town had come together, united by truth and justice, just as he had hoped. Order, Judge Martinez called, though her voice held no rebuke. The celebration gradually quieted. I have one final statement. This case reminds us that integrity isn't just about following rules, it's about seeking truth and admitting when we're wrong. Harper's essay about her mother spoke of love, honesty, and standing up for what's right. Today, she and her father have demonstrated those very qualities. Emily stood straight and tall beside Daniel, her mother's pearls catching the sunlight. The years seemed to fall away from Daniel's face as he looked at his daughter with pride. In that moment, everyone in the courtroom could see what he had known all along, the truth of a daughter's love for her mother, a father's devotion to his child, and the power of unwavering faith in doing what's right. Reporters pressed forward, calling out questions, their cameras still flashing. But Daniel and Emily had eyes only for each other, their embrace saying more than words ever could. The warmth of victory and vindication filled the courtroom, turning what had been a place of anxiety and doubt into a sanctuary of justice and joy. Through the windows, sunshine poured in stronger now, as if nature itself celebrated their triumph. The light touched everyone, the beaming Mrs. Green, the proud Henry Wallace, the cheering townspeople, and at the center, a father and daughter who had never stopped believing in each other. Golden afternoon sunlight poured through the kitchen windows of the Harper home, warming the modest dining room where three place settings adorned the scratched oak table. The aroma of pot roast, Daniel's specialty and his late wife's recipe, filled the air as Henry Wallace settled into his usual chair, his tie loosened after church. Emily had changed from her Sunday dress into comfortable jeans and a soft blue sweater, her mother's pearl earrings still catching the light. She moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, helping her father serve, the routine of Sunday dinner now comfortably expanded to include their unexpected ally and friend. "This looks wonderful, Daniel," Henry said, accepting a steaming plate. "Martha's recipe still going strong, I see." Daniel nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Emily's got it memorized now, too." Passing down the tradition, the meal progressed with comfortable conversation until Emily noticed the thick envelope sitting on the counter, its university seal prominent in the corner. Her fork clattered against her plate. "Dad, it came." The letter from State University came. Daniel wiped his hands slowly on his napkin, his expression a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Well, sweetheart, do you want to open it now?" Emily's fingers trembled as she reached for the envelope. Henry set down his fork, watching with grandfatherly anticipation. The room grew still except for the gentle ticking of the old kitchen clock and the sound of tearing paper. Emily unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the words. For a moment she said nothing. Then tears welled up and spilled down her cheeks. "I got in," she whispered. Then louder, "I got in. They accepted me." Daniel was on his feet in an instant, pulling Emily into a fierce hug. His own eyes glistened as he held his daughter, this moment crystallizing everything they'd fought for. Henry stood too, beaming with pride. Full scholarship. Emily managed through happy sobs, still clutching the letter. "They said my essay showed exceptional insight and moral courage." Daniel released her only for Henry to wrap her in a warm embrace. "Of course it did, young lady. You showed this whole town what courage looks like." They settled back at the table, the pot roast forgotten as Emily read the entire letter aloud. Henry dabbed at his eyes with his napkin, remembering his own son who never got such a chance. But here, in this moment, he felt a piece of that old wound healing. "You know," Henry said, his voice rough with emotion, "watching you two stand up for what's right, it helped me too. More than you know." Emily reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We couldn't have done it without you, Judge Wallace. I mean, Henry." She smiled at the old title that still slipped out sometimes. "Oh, I think you could have," Henry replied. "Your father's determination was something to behold, but I'm grateful I got to be part of it. Helps make up for times I stayed silent when I should have spoken up." Daniel nodded, understanding. Sometimes it takes seeing someone else's fight to find your own courage again. The conversation drifted to plans for the future, Emily's dreams of studying journalism, of giving voice to others who needed to be heard. The afternoon light softened to early evening, and they cleared the table together, working in comfortable familiarity. News of Emily's acceptance spread quickly through their small town. The phone began ringing, Mrs. Green first, then Emily's old youth group leader, then others. Each call carried congratulations and pride. The same community that had once whispered doubts now celebrated one of their own rising above injustice. "Did you hear?" Emily said, hanging up from another call. "They're using my story in the freshman orientation now, about standing up for truth even when it's hard." "You've given them something to believe in," Henry said. "Sometimes people just need to see it's possible." As dusk approached, Henry prepared to leave, hugging them both. "Sunday dinner next week?" he asked, though they all knew it wasn't really a question anymore. "Wouldn't be the same without you," Daniel assured him. After Henry left, Daniel and Emily moved to the front porch, settling into the old wooden swing that had been there since Emily was small. The evening air was soft with approaching summer, carrying the sweet scent of honeysuckle from the vine that climbed the porch rail. Fireflies began to appear in the gathering twilight, their gentle lights dancing across the front yard. Emily watched them, remembering countless evenings spent catching them in jars with her mother, who always insisted on releasing them before bedtime. The porch swing creaked gently as they rocked, a rhythm as familiar as their own heartbeats. The weight of the future felt lighter now, full of promise instead of fear. Emily leaned against her father's shoulder, feeling the solid strength that had never wavered, even in their darkest moments. Daniel's voice was soft in the growing darkness. "Your mama would be proud," Emily smiled, watching the fireflies rise against the purple evening sky, her heart full of hope for whatever came next. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and share your theories in the comments below because this story is just getting started. If today's story touched you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from, and more importantly, how it made you feel. Drop your reflections and location in the comments. I read every one. And if you believe in the power of stories that inspire hope, courage, and second chances, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe or follow. That way, we can keep building this community of hearts together. Until next time, remember this: you are seen, you are valued, and your story matters too. Stay hopeful, and I'll see you in the next one.